And a good morning to you. We're coming on the air with breaking news about former President Donald Trump. Just moments ago, a federal appeals court in Washington, D.C. rejected Mr. Trump's legal claim that the former president is immune from criminal charges for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. This all ahead of his criminal trials that are slated to start a little bit later this year, as early as March, perhaps. Let's go straight to our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. So let's just start with what this ruling means and what it does not mean. And I would assume that the president will likely appeal immediately to the Supreme Court.
He may go to the Supreme Court, Craig, but just to walk people through what has happened here, the former president tried to file this motion to try to get the case completely wiped away from the books, right? Because if he's immune from prosecution, then he cannot be tried at all. And again, this isn't the case in Washington, D.C., where he's been accused of trying to overturn the last election. Now, he lost in the lower court on that issue. He appealed up to this three-judge panel. 2 Biden appointees, 1 Bush appointee has rejected that completely. Now that he's lost at this level, he can try to go to the full panel of D.C. Circuit judges there. There are about 11 or 13 active judges. Or, if he wants, he can go to the Supreme Court. Now, why might he want to go to the full D.C. Circuit? Because the whole point of this is to delay. And so if he does that, it slows this train down, Craig.
NBC's Garrett Hake has been covering the former president. Garrett joins us now. They're from Washington. Garrett, have we heard anything so far from the former president or his team?
We've not yet, Craig, but I think we know what we will hear from the former president. I suspect he will announce an appeal either to the district court, to the appeals court en banc, as Laura was suggesting, or to the Supreme Court. He has been really singularly focused on this case, including posting on social media overnight what he believes is the importance of continuing this concept of presidential immunity past the presidency, suggesting that any future president would immediately be indicted after leaving office by the opposing party. He argues in public, to a lesser degree than in his filings before the courts, that a sitting president would be unable to properly function if this ruling had gone against him. Again, that was a post from last night. I suspect we will soon hear more from him today. And, Craig, remember that Donald Trump has made all of these legal battles that he's engaged with, but especially this case, central to his campaign. He argues that this is all political speech that he was involved in, that he's being targeted by the courts and by the Biden Justice Department because he cannot be beaten by President Biden electorally. Now he has this court defeat on his plate. I suspect we will soon see this continue to be a centerpiece of his political arguments. It has worked for him with his base, winning these first early primaries in the Republican presidential nominating contest. Many Republican voters I've talked to say they could have agree with Donald Trump in theory about these cases, but there's peril for him politically down the line if these cases do move forward into the summer and early fall election season, Craig.
Well, Laura, you've been following this case closer than most. I know you've been poring over some of these documents.
So one thing that's important for the timing here, because remember, that's, of course, what the former president's goal is here, is to slow this down. The D.C. Circuit, this federal appeals court, has said that he has a certain prescribed period in which he can try to appeal to the Supreme Court, as we were talking about, and he can try to go to the D.C. Circuit. But they've given him a very narrow window, so he can't just sort of sit on this as long as he wants. He has roughly a week through about February 12th if he wants to go to the Supreme Court. And if he goes to the Supreme Court, everything on here that's happening right now will stay on pause. He can do that while it works its way through the court system. If he doesn't go to the Supreme Court by February 12th, then this is back in action. What does that mean? Then the trial date is back on, because right now, remember, this case has been working its way through the courts for months now, and so the trial date has essentially been frozen in time. But now that they said he's not immune, theoretically, he could be tried. But what they're saying is he will have some time now to go to the Supreme Court, again, roughly till about February 12th.
Are we at all surprised about the decision from the 3-judge panel?
I think it's significant, although not wholly surprising. What's been most surprising is how long it took. Based on oral argument, they seemed very skeptical of his claims. They seemed very troubled by some of the scenarios that his lawyers had laid out about why he might be immune, essentially suggesting that he could try to have his political rival assassinated and he would still be immune if he hadn't been impeached and convicted, as the former president was not convicted by the Senate. I think those were arguments that this panel was troubled by. We're going to pour through it, actually see some of their reasons reasoning as we go through all the many different pages here. But there's still a host of arguments that he can make in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court might rule differently than this federal appeals court.
And again, to be clear, we're talking about one of the 4 cases involving the former president right now.
Yes, and this will not have any effect on those cases. This is narrowly cabined to the one in Washington, D.C. We have the one in New York. We have the one in Florida. We have many cases around the country involving him. This is very limited to the one in D.C. about overturning the last election.
I'll let you continue to sift through those documents while we turn to our Garrett Haake once again there in Washington. Garrett, let me bring you back into the conversation and spend a little bit more time talking about a point that you just made. We saw what the former president did in Iowa. We saw what he did in New Hampshire. He is leading by double digits in all major polls so far in South Carolina. He is the front runner. This does not seem to be having any sort of measurable effect on Republican primary voters so far, does it?
No, it hasn't so far, Craig, but that's not to say that it remains the case in the future entirely here. I mean, when you look across the first 2 primaries and the ones coming up, including the caucus on Nevada on Thursday night, which will be the next state to award any delegates, Republican primary voters have indicated that they essentially believe what Donald Trump has told them, the idea that he is being unfairly targeted, in this case for political speech, but across all of these cases because he is the strongest challenger to Joe Biden. But when you look at polling data, including our new NBC News poll that came out over the weekend, you do see the potential peril for Donald Trump in a general election down the line. The numbers in that poll, which show him leading Joe Biden narrowly right now nationally, turn against him if he is convicted of a crime. And so the timing here becomes very important. Does this case actually go to trial before a Republican convention? Does it go to trial before voters start casting their ballots in a general election in the early fall? Remember, election day is now election month in many cases. When and if these things are adjudicated and how they go could still be a determining factor. I've been covering Donald Trump for more than a year now, covering this campaign since its inception. And the one thing that has been clear to me across all of this is that the things that are driving voter beliefs about Donald Trump and about his relative strength against Joe Biden and the Republican field have had far more to do with what's happened in courtrooms than what's happened in traditional campaign trail stops. And it's worth pointing out, Craig, Donald Trump's attorneys will be back in court in Washington, D.C., in front of the Supreme Court on Thursday, when they'll be arguing whether he should be able to stay on the ballot in Colorado. Remember, he was a judge there. The Colorado Supreme Court, rather, had determined he's ineligible to be on the ballot in Colorado under the 14th Amendment for having been involved in insurrection. The challenges for Donald Trump and his both ability to remain a candidate and to remain a viable candidate, to remain somebody who's not locked down in a courtroom until Election Day, are broad and manifest across many different cases in many different jurisdictions. And this week, the 1-2 punch of this appeals court hearing today, that court hearing on Thursday, the day of the next contest in this race, I think really display that quite clearly.
Garrett, again, we just got this word about 20 minutes ago. Haven't heard anything from Mr. Trump's campaign, anything from the White House so far. And do we expect at some point today, perhaps, to hear anything from the White House?
That's a good question, Craig. I mean, the White House has, in general, tried to keep some distance between themselves and Donald Trump and all of these legal challenges. They don't want to feed into the perception that somehow the White House is connected to this or behind this the way that Donald Trump talks about it. But that said, the White House did make pretty clear, and Joe Biden, I think, has made fairly clear, that they didn't believe in this concept of presidential immunity the way that Donald Trump described it. As Laura pointed out, his lawyers were forced to answer questions in the extreme. If this idea of presidential immunity was real, could a president order an assassination of a political rival? And when Trump's lawyers were pushed that far, I think it made it easier for this White House to say, yeah, we definitely don't agree with their interpretation of that. But from a governing standpoint, I don't think it's particularly valuable for the Biden White House to get involved. And from a political standpoint, they want to keep some distance here. Now, I wouldn't expect the same from Democratic allies of the current president, who are going to want to amplify any message about Donald Trump's legal challenges, the possibility of him going on trial, the possibility of him being convicted. They understand the politics quite clearly, but who the messenger is here today and going forward, I think will be very important.
All right, Garrett, stand by for me. Let me bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson, now. Hallie's on the phone for us. Hallie, what say you in terms of what all of this could mean politically for the president moving forward for this race? Or does it mean anything at all?
Well, Listen, it depends on which electorate you're talking to, Craig. It's a great question. And as we look at it through this political lens, because as Garrett and others have pointed out, it is a legal issue, obviously, for former President Trump. It is also a political one. If you're talking about the primary electorate, that is Republican voters, most of whom back former President Trump, this is likely to only add to the sense, and I've being on the road talking with some of these folks, you hear it again and again. They feel that former President Trump is being persecuted by the Justice Department, persecuted by President Biden, persecuted by Democrats who are essentially in charge of some of the government and governmental levers here in Washington. So politically, for the former president, as it relates to the primary, which, by the way, we're still in, Craig, right? Technically, we're still in the primary. Nikki Haley is obviously trailing far behind former President Trump, but that is still the process. He is not the nominee officially, at least not yet. That's the landscape there. The question is what happens in a general election. And I think some of the new poll numbers that we have out today are particularly interesting, that 6 in 10 voters say they are concerned about former President Trump's legal issues here, the criminal trials, the civil trials that he is facing. And now with this new decision, it guarantees that this is going to be in the spotlight for a while longer. And so that dynamic is one that is going to be critical come November, depending on how much it moves voters. Again, I'm talking about the general election, right? The stuff that happens in November, once we get through conventions and everything else. So that's, I think, some of the dynamic of the political landscape from the primary and the general. You've also got to look at what this means for the Supreme Court moving forward as well. And obviously the former president's nominees, who are now Supreme Court justices on that court too, Craig.
All right, Hallie, stand by. Laura Jarrett here in the studio. I want to read just for a moment here an excerpt from the ruling, perhaps arguably the thesis. Quote, for the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump. Yeah. With all of the defenses of any other criminal defendant, but any executive immunity that may have protected him while he served as president no longer protects him against this prosecution.
In other words, he's not special. In other words, now that he's no longer president, he doesn't get to enjoy all of those privileges. But I should just point out, even if he has lost this battle, he may have won the war, because the war was to try to make sure that this trial date did not happen before the next election. And it's not at all clear that it will, for all the reasons that Hallie and Garrett pointed out. This was supposed to go to trial next month. That is off the table right now. There's not a chance that this can go to trial next March, and this coming March. And it's not even clear that it can go to trial in the coming months after that. And so this is obviously a unanimous sort of renunciation of all of his claims. But again, if the whole point was to get rid of that trial date, as of right now, he has succeeded in that effort, Craig.
And to remind folks, again, in terms of timetable and next steps, he has a week to appeal this.
He can take this up to the Supreme Court if he chooses to do that. It's not at all clear, though, that the Supreme Court will necessarily take this up. They could decide not to hear it, in which case this all then comes back into play, and then we're back down seeing this case go to trial. Craig.
All right, our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. Laura, thank you. Garrett Haake there in D.C., a big thanks to you as well, and Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.